Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday to you. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm thrilled to have you all here today to meet my friend, Amy Yurko, who's going to give a little bit more detailed introduction of herself, but I'll tell you a little bit about how I met her. Christian Long actually introduced me to her when I started consulting many moons ago. So this must have been like 10 years ago. And we got on the phone and we talked and we found that we were kindred spirits, I think. And so we've led some workshops together and we've kept in touch over the years. And as we've started this new kind of professional learning community called Actionable Innovations, Amy's been part of it, a part of the formation of it, and actually named our group. So Amy, your creativity is very much valued by us, and we're so glad to have you here. And for those of you who are kind of new to what we're trying to accomplish, we are a group of people that are interested in moving education forward and learning from each other first and foremost. And I think that all of us in our own way have kind of struggled to figure out where do we find professional development for people who are kind of interested in pushing the envelope and that sort of thing. So we're doing it for ourselves, really. And the other piece of this is that I think over the years in my work with educational technology, that I've developed a really interesting network of people. And nothing gives me better pleasure than having the people I've met from my journeys meet each other. And I think that synergy from that is apparent in our group that we've formed. So if you're interested in getting more involved with Actionable Innovations, you can email me. I'll give you information at the end of this. But today I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and she's going to kind of lead us through rethinking educational environments as we are poised for the next version of this pandemic, whatever that is. And thank you, Amy, for being here. We're so glad to have you, and take it away.
All right. Thanks, Lucy, and to everyone else I see on the call. Shout out Bob Hudson. Thank you for being here. Good to see you. But let's just jump right in. As I think a few folks have started breaking the ice here, we'd like to have everyone just in the chat kind of participate. We know Zoom isn't that participatory as the original platform we were hoping to use, but if we can try to get our insights out and into the conversation, it will make it all richer for all of us. So this is just a little icebreaker to get us going, that if we just chat to share one pandemic change in education that you would hope to see continue, as Lucy mentioned earlier, and I see there's a few responses already. And I think it's a kind of important, that'll be sort of a thread that, we've had this crazy thing thrown into our world 18 or so months ago, and we've done some things well, and we've done some things not so well. So maybe there's some lessons learned, and we can take advantage of the chaos as we move forward. So keep them coming. Welcome everyone, and we'll jump right in. Just a tad about me. As Lucy mentioned, I'm an architect. I also teach. I taught at the middle school level in Chicago public schools in their STEM program for 7th and 8th graders. And I taught at IIT and University of Southern California, Harvard summer classes, and now I'm doing the advanced course for Association for Learning Environments, which will start this fall. I founded Brain Spaces because I thought there was a missing link between educators and architects, and they speak different language. And I can kind of bridge that gap. And I've just been very lucky, very fortunate to have amazing clients all around the world. And the one most dear to my heart right now is the Schools for Children of the World. And we build schools in economically disadvantaged areas of the world. And so follow that if you can, because there's some really cool stuff happening there. So enough about me. I guess one of the things I wanted to start with is that I feel that I truly believe that every element of design is laden with messages. And if we really want to curate that message, that we need to be really cognizant of what we're saying and what the space is telling us and our students. So I think that each element of design speaks to your values, and each gives you cues and clues to behavior. There's actually some research on that called the affordance theory, if you wanted to follow that a little more closely. But what I love about this image over to the side is that it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be crazy. It can just be, what is our message? Our message is that walking down this path is going to be fun. It may or may not lead you to a door or a stairway. It also says that, in terms of what we know about the brain and learning, that brains are more stimulated on a circuitous path than they are in a straight line. So why are all of our schools designed with straight on hallways? I think we're listening to the wrong people, and we may be focusing on the wrong thing. So we'd like to try to have a conversation about fixing that, or doing what we can. And so if we really truly think, and I say this all the time, what would it look like if we really meant it, right? So if we really think, what do we want for our kids? We want it to be messy and fun, and all of these things, and the spaces that we often give them look like this. And I have to say, this is a relatively old photograph, and I still think it's funny. I took this in Hawaii. Hello. I mean, where the environment is spectacular, and then the kids come to this sensory deprivation zone for school. And the teacher recognizes the value of daylight. So their little office space is huddled around the one window in the room. And someone has a lame attempt at putting graphics on the wall that the kids aren't even facing. Anyway, it's dismal. And I think this represents a lot of the schools in our world today. And I think we can do better. I think we need to tell the students we care about them, and we care about what they learn and how they learn. And so just to kind of put a frame on this conversation, we wanted to start talking about what are some of those lessons learned from a pandemic, and what have we seen in the past, and some examples of how we've taken advantage of or how we've designed spaces in the past, and what we might be able to learn from those, and how we might bring those forward. If there's time, I have a case study, but I really hope that we're kind of interactive here, and that the conversation gets going, and that we don't have time for a case study. But if we do, we have that in there as a backup. So, again, starting with the pandemic, which I think is an interesting, it's been an interesting social experiment. And I had a senior in high school. It was a really challenging year to be a senior in high school last year. But it was stormy. It was stormy and cloudy and crazy, and we need to kind of look beyond all of that crazy and difficulty and challenge, and find what are some of those nuggets that we can pull forward. And so if we look at teaching and learning during the pandemic, we can see that there's a few things that we can define that framed the teaching and learning that I saw happening during the pandemic. And we can look at, words defined over here. I'm gonna move some things around. That, safe during the pandemic meant distant and sterile and not active, seat maps. Remote meant not in a building. Online was really just like simulated classroom. It wasn't really anything much deeper than that.
You have a stomachache all day, and I think she should probably.
I think I've got some background. Are you guys hearing that? No? Okay. That guided, here, follow these instructions, or self-directed, where it was like, well, just do your homework by yourself. And so if we look at rethinking some of those things, taking those same 5 words we just looked at and said, what if we said safe means, more of a social and psychological safety, but also physically more open air. Maybe remote means anywhere, including school properties, but perhaps not in classrooms. Maybe online means expanded and unlimited. Maybe guided means you follow your own interests. Maybe self-directed is exactly that as well. So anyway, I think, again, we can, if we kind of take those words and help and try to redefine them, then I think it can give us some clues for what we need to do next. I think this is a really terrific example, and this is obviously not a school, but learners find their own paths and they get there the way they need to get there, and we look for differences as opposed to similarities. And even the best of designers can make beautiful schools, but if they don't accommodate the learners, if they don't accommodate that inspiration, then it's really, it's going to be in the way, and learners and teachers will find their own workarounds, much to the dismay of architects sometimes, but we'll make our own path anyway. So let's take away that struggle. Let's take away walking in the mud. And so if we ask students for their ideas of what they want school to be, we get drawings like this. This is one of my faves. Some of you may have seen this before if you've seen anything I've presented, because I think it's lovely. I colorized it, but essentially it's a student drawing of a cool school. That was the only instruction. And so what we see here is, I know Baskin Robbins, if you could, it's probably too small to see, but on the launching pad, the little quote, the bubble quote says, "Today's field trip is Mars." I mean, kids are really out there thinking, roller coaster, jet skis. This is on an island, but the lake, and you can't get the jet skis out to the rest of the water. I don't know, it's weird. But the other thing that you may notice here, gym and library, same size. But you may notice that the classrooms are still lined up along a straight hallway. And so even kids are sort of not able to be brave enough to think about what is that unit that we call classrooms. I do think that's cool that there's a runway along one of the classrooms. So, they're out there thinking, and they're thinking more out there than we are. So, so let's follow suit here. So, what it illustrates, I think, is that we need to design for their future, not our past. And of course, when we work with school districts and private school entities, they talk about, well, this was good enough for me. This was good for my parents. This was, I turned out okay. And are really looking at recreating their own school experience, when in fact what we really need to do is be creating the experience for the next generation of teachers and learners. And so it takes a little bit of being brave, I think, because it takes us outside of what we what we're comfortable with, what we're familiar with, and into a zone that we're not really sure about. But keep in mind that that students will find their own way anyway. So we just need to open the pathway for them to do that. And again, it doesn't have to be crazy, expensive, and complicated. This is just from Make Magazine. And, learning can be fun. Learning can be a game and engaging. And it does, this is a very simple approach to that. I was working with a group of middle school educators week before, and they talked about doing for kicking off the literacy component, that they were going to do a book tasting. And so they would have menus and servers, and the servers would have to describe the book so that the person ordering would be able to select a book that would fit their taste at the moment. And anyway, those kinds of ideas are just really fabulous and really are brave, but not impossible. Now, Don had a discussion yesterday where he was talking about his own experience in teaching, and please go back and listen to that recording, because there was a lot of really amazing things, Don. I'm sorry I missed the live version, but I went back and watched it, and I loved this interactive design strategy that or concept that you presented. And again, it talks about it's sort of not our not the school that we went to. It's really very different. And please look at that, listen to that presentation, because Don makes some really excellent points here. So one of the things is I always like analogies and stories, and Lucy knows this about me, is that if we were imagining school, like the school building as the analogy of a phone, so where were we pre-pandemic? We were iPhone, smartphone kind of thing. We had incremental advances, some of them bigger than others, but where, we were doing quite a bit of things with a phone. A phone was multi-purpose, like a school. It still, school had a lot of social impact, a lot of individualized learning and IEPs and holistic opportunities for students, body, mind, and spirit, and those, and I could go on and on. And so we're at this point where we can say, let's, what do we do now? Do we go back? Because if we look at a lot of the things that happened during the pandemic, it was about everybody face front, everybody be apart, nobody talk to each other. It really did take us back, and probably back further than this princess phone. It probably went back, and I think we really need to move forward. And so what does that look like? I don't know what that looks like, but and I'm not sure this is it, but the point is, to really look at the user experience, to really look at the way brains take in information and make sense of it. And how do we connect, and what do we expect that will happen when we're learning and how we learn. So again, this is a sort of call to arms. Let's go forward, not back. And so again, what's the, innovation, and our group is Actionable Innovations. We're hoping you can take away some nuggets you can actually use today, and share some of nuggets that we can use. But we know that happens at the sort of, this intersection, and that we really need to spend some time in that intersection, even though it may be uncomfortable. And one of my favorite quotes is from Alice in Wonderland, where she goes, "Why? Sometimes I think of as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Okay, let's do that. Be like the queen. All right, so we're going to move on. So when we looked at 2020 and the fall, and people were trying to reopen, there may have been some good intentions here, but no, this isn't it. No. This is the princess phone. This, it's a nice try, and maybe, but I think as Don, you illustrated pretty well yesterday, no, still not that. But what if we really did move on to the next wave of the phone analogy, and it actually became a 3D thing, and it became something that's much more choice driven, much more activity driven. I think it would mean that our spaces look a little bit different. So let's just look real quickly at when this happened the last time. We had the tuberculosis pandemic, and we had classrooms on a ferry in New York. Now, keep in mind, these kiddos are still facing front, and there's a board. It's still very, very similar, but it's outdoor, and even in the cold, we can withstand that. Or on the roof, where we're all, again, open air. This is New York City. And then we had some schools that were designed with, several years later, that were designed with some of those lessons learned being embodied in the design. Now, this is Crow Island School in Winnetka, just north of Chicago. I had a niece and nephew who went through this school, so that was really fabulous for me. But you can see that in this example, there are courtyards and classrooms, so you could really be inside and outside in the court during the course of the day. And you can kind of see these L-shaped classrooms here with the courtyard, and the sort of fat part was the indoor classroom, and each classroom had its outdoor space, and there were window seats to read on. It was just a lovely, lovely solution. This is the school today, different furniture, but still beautiful, and still including courtyards along with the classrooms and the window seats. Lovely example, if you're ever in the area, you have to schedule a tour because they have so many people who want to tour there. But another example is in Amsterdam, and this is the open air school, which again, you can see a similar idea. This goes vertically, of course, but you have, I'll show you the floor plan. You have enclosed areas and you have open areas that you can just sort of leak out of the classrooms and to the outside. This is what it looks like today, still in use. Other classroom designs where the classrooms are like pavilions, and again, a lot of openness around them. It's sort of like a nature school, where you can see this is in the 30s. And if we look at those classrooms, you can see that the windows open up into doors that lead directly outside, it increases the opportunity for how the rooms are used. And you can see it today. So I think there's some really, really terrific examples and things that we could learn from, not least of which is Neutra, who had conceptualized learning environments for LA Unified, where the learning extends out into the classroom and under a tree, and that may be a better classroom is even under a tree outside. So you can see some of that illustrated here. Lots of really beautiful precedents. So, and we could go on and on and on because there's some really lovely, lovely schools. And thank you for the posts of links and things. So I'm hoping that we have more and more examples we can share. But I was thinking of trying to categorize the lessons learned. And we can go through some of these, but I think the categories are, how do we zone and plan spaces for different kinds of activities and different uses and different ways of maintaining that safety without compromising teaching and learning. We can look at how we're using time and activities. The workshop that I did with teachers last week, I mentioned, was, what are the rules for reopening in 2021? And, one of them was a seat map is required every time you have students together for longer than 15 minutes. So we were working with the teachers to define their class periods as being less than 15-minute increments of doing various activities. So we're using that to as a workaround, but it also means that students are going to be up and more active, which is the goal. So so sometimes those pandemic rules, if you find your workaround, can actually check a lot of boxes that maybe you hadn't even intended. So certainly there's indoor air quality and materials and infection control, a lot more hand washing, and all that's, we won't get into that much today because that's all sort of behind the scenes, very, very important. But that another conversation another day. New technologies are also going to be discussed in future salons that Actionable Innovations will be doing. So I'm not going to focus too much on that today. Signage and wayfinding and that environmental aspects of helping students navigate their buildings, and then certainly alternative learning settings, so outdoor and other ways we can address environments. So as I mentioned before, once we had to do this lockdown and 6-foot rule and everything, all of our clients were saying, oh, help me understand how we're going to use our building and how many students we can fit and all this. The question was, how do we fit our students? And really the more successful solutions were not necessarily how do we fit students in a space, but how do we orchestrate the activities in a way that allows for both interaction, teaching and learning that we know works, as well as safety and security as an overlay. So these were very awkward drawings, and they were also very awkward to implement because it was just, sort of this arbitrary 6-foot rule. But anyway, some things we've learned from that is that if we start with the right kinds of furniture in a space, that perhaps we can very easily shift a classroom or a learning environment to various modes depending on what the needs are, and one of those needs being pandemic needs. But a lot of the other needs are really, is this more of a presentation, or is this more of a discussion, and how can we move things around quickly and efficiently to enable those kinds of different activities. And so what you're looking at here is the same room and the same exact furniture set, but illustrated in 4 different layouts. Sketches done by Peter Brown, who has a beautiful sketching hand. But you can kind of see that the furniture just used in different ways can make the whole room seem different. So I think those things are important. And we're also seeing more, more hand washing components, and that perhaps school design moving forward does have more opportunities for hand washing stations. Perhaps as the image on the left, it's hand washing, but it's also learning through play, learning through water. So it can actually do more than one thing. So again, we're thinking about more the ability to do hand washing, but not having it be sort of the most important thing in the room, just something that enables that infection control to happen. Signage is near and dear to my heart here, because when we did the pandemic lockdown, CDC came up with all this signage, which I don't know if you care about graphics at all, but you look at this stuff and it's like, whoa. I mean, it's really hard to read. It's really scary. It's, how do you understand what's happening if you can't read yet? I mean, there's a lot of complications from the signage we saw come out, and so we were looking at, well, what would be some options of making signage be other than scary? Maybe we know brain research that fear and learning don't mix. So how about signage over the school speed limit sign? I think it might cause a few accidents there, but the point is that it's also a learning exercise, and it's kind of, this is a little tongue in cheek, but solve for X, or how long is 6 feet anyway? Or if we have to follow a wayfinding pathway, how about we color code it, and so that it still makes sense even when we don't have to contact trace. So again, I think there's by including signage, the right kind of signage, it becomes a little more timeless and applicable even when we don't have to all the COVID parameters. And so a friend of mine is a graphic designer, developed some stuff for me that I thought was interesting in an elementary school, that really just follow the germs. So much of the signage said, wash your hands, which is put soap on your hands and put water on your hands. Well, the real point of washing your hands is to wash the germs off of your hands. So, how can we be more clear about the signage and make it into a learning experience? Why do we wear masks? So we can follow those germs and we can contain them. And how can we make this a little more fun and interactive? And so we did, some versions for younger kids and older kids, and the older kids ones will have more text, but also talk about, well, what does soap do? Chemically. And so it again becomes something that is more of a teaching tool and a learning tool. And moving right along, I'm not even giving a lot of any chances for people to connect, to comment. So I'm hoping we can lump that into the end, but alternative learning settings, certainly using the outdoors more, no matter what environment you're in. And I know there are, it was interesting. I was designing a school in Las Vegas at the same time I was designing one in Anchorage, Alaska. And a lot of their issues are the same. It was about keeping the outside out. But they still also use the outside. It's just different. So I think that there's a lot of lessons learned from outdoor environments. And I want to also say that there are some lessons that, we don't want, there's some illustrations of how we don't want to do it. And that's just as important as well. Although I love the trees in there. So perhaps if we had outdoor spaces where we could gather and perhaps distance a little bit more, that would be nice. Or perhaps there's outdoor learning areas in local parks or nature centers that we could take advantage of. But even there's a potential right outside of, what looks like back there with all its chain link. It looks like a pretty dismal school environment, but outside is a pretty cool project these students are working on. So, we also think that learning needs to be experiential, and that's really tough when you're not face-to-face and in the place. So how can we bring some of that interactive and experiential components back into the mix? This happens to be outside. This is a great example of, learning angles. And I know if it was my kid at that age, he'd be aiming for 180 and end up with a broken arm, but he would learn his angles. And we often see as well, interactive means architects like to put a sundial in the courtyard. And that's a step in the right direction. But how about if we have the child be the dial in the sundial? It becomes a different kind of learning when you actually can participate. Again, alternative settings, that this is not a pandemic setting. This is actually a PTO project in a school parking lot. But, the settings can be interactive. And I think this is a good example of that. The other thing that we've seen is equitable and inclusive kind of environments, and sort of transitioning the old grouped restrooms into a more inclusive and functional arrangement. And so this is a project, or a school project in Vancouver, actually, where the restrooms that you see along the right side of this photo are all gender neutral, as are the sinks. And then there's windows into that from the hallway for sort of safety and supervision. And there are some ADA restrooms that are on the ends that are larger. But anyway, we're changing the way that we're looking at even the simplest of spaces to make them, more inclusive and equitable. And some of those lessons are pretty poignant as well. Buildings that, this is Nevada, so it's not, the weather is something to contend with. However, schools do have a lot of big blank walls. Say this happens to be a cafeteria, but it could also be a side of a gym, things like that where we need we have a big mass of wall space. But in this example, they made it into an outdoor theater. And so it can welcome the community to use the space after hours. So again, finding welcoming ways to integrate the community and make it not be so difficult and scary for neighbors to come and use the school simultaneously with students. And I'm just going to touch on virtual, because I know we're gonna get there in the next salon or two. But the idea of VR, I think, is really, really interesting. I know that during the pandemic, my teenager had a VR headset where he could actually be with his friends, who some of which weren't even in the same state. And we also had, surgery simulator, so we could pretend to do surgery. We killed lots of patients that way. But, there's things that I think are coming down the pike that will make some VR a really interesting next step. And what does that look like? What will that look like for teaching and learning? I think it's going to be sort of the way that technology went when computers first came out, and we were like, well, we need to have a computer lab. And so just like some of these image shows show, this is a VR studio. But likely, just like technology, it will become more handhelds and more ubiquitous throughout the school facilities, and not be so location based. So jury's out. We'll see what happens there. But I think there's I've seen some very exciting things on the cusp of coming to the education world, and I'm sure you guys have too. So one of the ways that, again, to be brave, to see what do we do next, is that look for learning opportunities in places that aren't your traditional schools, and find in a simple wetland how many things you can do there and learn there, and these kinds of spaces are everywhere. So whether it's your kitchen and kitchen science, or whether it's a wetland in your neighborhood, or whether it's downtown and you can learn about structure and proportion and streets and traffic, there's environments all around us, and we don't take as much advantage of those as we could. So just like the previous slide showed, we start to look at designing spaces using activities to define those spaces. And I see Bob Hudson, thank you for that. I was going to use the example of the library at Aptekissick Junior High, because we looked at the redesign of that project, sort of like what this is illustrating, but is look at what are the activities that need to happen, and then sort of define the spaces that support those activities. And so if we start with verbs, as opposed to, well, we need desks or we need tables, let's start, we need to talk, we need to plan, we need to explore, we need to discuss, and then those kind of things will then generate the kinds of spaces that will support those activities. And so some examples, again, indoor, outdoor, these are more current examples that have taken clues from those historic precedents. Some nice examples. This is a case study that I promised we would get to. And I alluded to the idea that we would get to it or else discuss. And so I'm going to pause right here, because this is a very cool project by HED and Maura Rubel and Brain Spaces as planner in a very complicated site with some very interesting components here. But I want to pause for a moment and see if there are questions and comments and insights that would like to be shared. And I know we have some actionable innovators on the line, and feel free for you guys to unmute, and but anyone else, we'd love to hear some ideas and insights from you. What are you seeing? So I'm going to try to look at some of the comments. Oh, Lucy. So Lucy says the Reggio based, where kids wanted a disco in the library or a pirate ship, and other students wanted a jungle. I love that. I mean, kids will come up with those things, but one of the things I find, Lucy, is and particularly you see these in playgrounds, but where the playgrounds are very descriptive of those kinds of ideas, like a pirate ship, is a ship form, and you go play on it and it's a ship. But it seems like there are more designers of play equipment that are allowing for gaps, allowing for students to bring their own imagination to the play space. So it may be that it's a structure that you climb on, and for one student it's a ship, a pirate ship, and for another it's Mount Everest, and for another it's a space station. But as long as you leave it loose enough, then students can bring their imagination to it, as opposed to making it a real prescriptive thing that we're telling students, here, play like this. So let's let them take their own path and play as they want to.
So I have a question for you regarding that. How do you, when you're working with a school, how do you help them develop more of a playful attitude or a playful approach? Because I think that we've gotten so compartmentalized about what should happen in spaces. And there's also budgetary constraints. And there's also the other thing I keep on thinking about too is, my son's high school, 2,200 kids in a building. How do we help schools become more playful and brave about how they're using their learning spaces?
Great question. I think that that's the $1 million question, but it really, all I can do is I can say, here's some examples of what I've seen happen, and created spaces for that. But I love even using the professional development session I did a couple of weeks ago. Was a school that I helped design in 2016, and it now is finally open. And so the teachers are coming in to use this new building, and the PD was about how to use it. And so it was very interesting when we started the conversation. The teachers were kind of disappointed that we got this brand new school and the classrooms are kind of small. And so as we worked with those teachers, and we did a very activity-based exercise where we said, here, what do you want to do? And now let's see what kind of spaces are available in the building for you to do those things. Then they realized, oh gosh, I don't even want this classroom. I don't even think I'm going to spend any time here, because we nudged them to by giving them other kinds of spaces that would be more useful for doing the kind of interactive activities that they were hoping to do. So I think that one of the ways of being brave is to not necessarily look at designing schools with the components that teachers ask for. It's kind of deeper than that. You need to look at, what do they really need? Because if you ask them what they want, they'll say what they already have. And I'm saying that with all respect, because I taught too, and you kind of want you want that simplicity and predictability. But when you offer different kinds of opportunities for interaction, it sends the message that it's not all about the classroom. It's about a bunch of other things. And so really focus on the activity, not the space, and then find a space that works for that activity.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I think that's absolutely brilliant, because I'm thinking back to my former school where we were redoing a library space, and the architect wanted to put in a VR room. And I'm like, we're not there yet. We're not ready for it yet. And it sounds great. It sounds great to donors or to people who are, going to tour the building or whatever. But we weren't there in the kinds of activities that we were doing with kids.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
down the road it would be used, but I'll tell you right now, the last time I was in that space, it's a storeroom right now. And so I love thinking about that, designing for the activity, but I also think that there needs to be a piece of educating the teachers about that, because otherwise that disappointment happens until they've been introduced to the building like you did. I think that's a really key piece to any new building, and I hadn't really thought about that before. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
I think there's probably go ahead.
The other thing I would say to your question is, if the leadership aren't innovative or creative, it's irrelevant no matter how creative the architects are, because it'll be slammed down. I put a link into the Ron Clark School in Atlanta, which, if the stairs has a slide, like, why shouldn't it be fun to get down floors? Like, the kids love it, but very few. And look at Ron Clark, look how animated he is, and you can see the reflection in the design. Of all the projects I've had so much stuff thrown out, as I'm sure Amy has and everyone else, where they're just not committed into that thing. So it's all about the leadership. And if they're willing to take that risk, then you'll get schools that Amy's talking about.
Sure. And that's so true. I had a client who we were in a school district when we were designing a new school, but in their other school, they got new furniture. An older school. So they kind of picked up the building, dumped it out, and put new furniture in there. And when the teachers got it, they organized it, even though it's kind of funny shapes and they could be brought together in different ways. and the chairs, some had wheels and some were, there's lots of variety. They set it up as a classroom. And every night that principal would go through the classrooms and move the furniture. He said he spent an hour after school every day going through, 20 classrooms and moving the furniture. And the teachers would come in and like, who? And they were all pissed off that they had to change their furniture back. Anyway, he said he did that for a couple of weeks. And finally, the teachers were just exasperated and started using it in the organizations and groupings and stuff that he was putting together until they realized, oh, wow, this enables a whole different kind of teaching and learning. I actually like this. Anyway, so that leader was so committed to changing it. But I think that's a pretty extreme example. But I think that it really does have to, it has to come from the top down. I can't tell you how many schools we've designed with windows between spaces and they get covered over with poster board or other paper. Regardless of the research that's another conversation for another day, but that proves that's better otherwise. And again, it's fear. And so how do we relieve the fear of teachers and everyone to do things differently than either we were taught or that we experienced in our own educations? It's not an easy thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have a funny incident like the one you're describing of the furniture. Another school I worked at, School of Columbia University, I wasn't part of the design, but it was a pod design. So you had like a central pod with the lockers and you could hang out, and then in individual classrooms, but all of the pods could be combined into one. And eventually what I saw the teachers do, they just close the pod. So from the room, they barricaded it with shelves. That's the statement they were making. So like, you cannot open this. It was just hilarious to see these barricades. And you could not
well, I was walking through a school that just touring, and a bunch of operable walls that were not not open. And I asked the teachers, how often do you open this? We never open it. Why? Because they had laptops and desktops in the room that the administration or maybe the district said that the teachers were personally responsible for. And so of course they didn't want to open their spaces because it would mean that they lose control of things that might really have a negative impact on their job. And so really that's a response, to the leadership directive. Same with window shades, open or close, lockdown closures have to happen in 3 minutes or less or whatever. And teachers like, there's no way I can get around this room in 3 minutes and close all my shades. So I'm going to just have to keep them closed. So I think there's a lot of policy in there that doesn't think through, the value of some of these strategies that we know work. And so it really has to be a systemic conversation. It can't be, just one.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think about how, bringing teachers into sort of the building simulation process, as far as like actually letting them lay out the way, like having blank spaces where they can actually go and lay out a simulation of how they would want to work, or take like your ideal and allowing them to actually move things into the arrangement and to give the justifications as to why. So as they start thinking about the user touch points throughout that space, depending on the district that you're in, like you said. So you've got policy, you have security issues, you have classroom management, you have the need for what they actually need to do in the classroom. Like I've seen so many classrooms where we'll put these glass walls looking into classrooms, which really doesn't serve the teacher or the students actually really well to do anything, because they lose all their space to actually do something with. So I think as designers, I come from the interiors side of things and have designed schools up in Connecticut, really trying to bring together the way that a teacher, bringing them into that design process, where I think so much of the time, like we sort of like allow teachers to come in and rubber stamp, like, oh, this looks so beautiful, this is so great, instead of actually bringing them into on the front end design process, and not just be the teacher leaders, and not just be, and not just be the administration. so they can actually see like, oh, this policy actually shows up this way in this classroom, and to make them more transparent to leadership so you can facilitate a conversation about the things that do need to shift and change and why
Absolutely.
a design might be a better solution.
Absolutely, Kathleen. Thanks for that. I'll tell a quick story about another client I had in North Dakota, which means is anybody from North Dakota here? It was a spectacular environment and a really great school, but nobody's ever going to visit. So anyway, what they did was they thought about time differently. And I think time is the final frontier. You know, we talk about space and we talk about program, we talk about a lot of things, technology around teaching and learning and education in schools and school design. But time is one of those things that seems, you know, there was some discussion with year round a few years ago, and there, you know, there's been some nibbles, but time has not really been explored as much as it could be. So the client in North Dakota in Bismarck said, we're going to do this whole day differently. And it was a high school, so it's not going to work for little guys. And it was the second or third high school in the district. So there was some choice. You could choose this or not. But they realized that students had different needs for childcare, for work environments, for taking care of elderly parents, for whatever. And they wanted to make the day more flexible. And so what they did was a flex mod schedule where in 20-minute increments, starting at, I don't know, insanely early, like 6 or 5 in the morning and going till 7 or 8 at night, they had 20-minute increments for the whole day. And so those first few increments, like say that, you know, from, 6 to 7 or whatever is football practice, you know, or band practice, you know, where not unlike what we currently see in a high school environment. But then throughout the day, and typically they were 3 20-minute increments to be, you know, a core class. So they had blocks, which sometimes were 4 or 5 or 6 of those 20-minute increments. But just talking about, and students could kind of, you know, they could work and then come after lunch and do their day after lunch, or they could finish their whole day before lunch and then go to work for the rest of their day, or pick up their siblings at their school by 3, you know, anyway, there were lots of different reasons. And teacher flexibility was also a concern there, is giving teachers the option of, you know, what time of day they wanted to sign up for. So anyway, if we just focus on the core for a minute, the core classes, and I'm summarizing, but we're say 3 blocks of 20 minutes each, an hour. For most classes, the teacher could, after the first 20 minutes, could kind of scope the room and see if, which students actually got whatever concept they were doing, or, you know, say it was a math class, they kind of got it, and they, those students who kind of get bored and disruptive once they have it and the rest of the class doesn't, so they have to sit there bored because they've already got it. So the teacher could let those students be excused from the class. And then in the next 20 minutes, they could do the same thing, kind of read the room, let a few more students go. And so for the last 20 minutes, they had those, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 students who really needed focused help. So it was really a great last 20 minutes for those students who needed, more personal attention. Where did those other students go, you might ask? I asked. They went to the music practice rooms to rehearse. They went to, they had a couple of sort of library-like spaces and maker spaces that they could go do work or catch up on other things or work ahead. They could leave campus. Some of them could. They could go run a few laps in the gym. They could go get something to eat because the cafeteria is open all day. They could go meet with a teacher. I mean, there are all kinds of, they could stay in the class and help tutor some of the kids. Some of them actually would go sit in the back of another class and kind of audit. But anyway, so what happened there was that now that it's been open for a couple of years, we've kind of stayed friends with the assistant principal there, and she said the incidence of behavior have gone way down because students aren't frustrated and distracted in class. The teachers say that first 20 minutes of class is why they got into teaching, because everybody wants to prove that they're learning so that they can be excused. Right? So they all are working really hard, which is kind of elevating the courses. A lot of really happy accidents happening out of that, but student choice, flexibility, trust, and all of these things coming together really was a brave thing to do. And there are lots of benefits that are happening from it. I'm going to look in the chat here. Who else has a story like that that's like, wait, what did you do?
I guess for me, I just have not seen in my own kids' experience, which has been fine. They've had a fine education. Do I say it's like the most magical one? No. But what I have not seen in our local area in Chicago, at least in terms of public schools, is options for doing things differently. And it feels to me that in other parts of the country there are. Whereas, we talked to Scott Elias early on when our group started meeting in Colorado Springs, where they have a STEM center that they're trying to reach all kids with, not just the kids who are, maybe need to be engaged a little differently. Or in Texas, I know that there's, schools that are just PBL oriented. We here in Illinois, we seemed, unless you're in Chicago public schools and you're going to a specific magnet or charter, there's not a lot of options really. It's really kind of sad. So where do you see certain regions in the country, Amy, in your work that are more apt to kind of explore things? For instance, I know Wisconsin is usually charters are kind of partnered with public schools. It's not so much of a us versus them kind of thing. And they've done things in Wisconsin where you don't like the public school in your area, you can transport your kid to the one next, the town next over. So do you see places where they're being more flexible to allow for some choice without being like, decimating public schools?
Yeah, that's a really great topic and a good question. I was lucky enough that my kid went to a public Montessori through 8th grade, and then Chicago High School for the Arts, a public arts high school, which had a school day that went from 8 till 5 every day. The students did their conservatory for 3 hours a day. My son did creative writing, but the dancers danced, the singers sang, the theater folks performed. It was pretty intense 4 years. And he's got 3,000 hours of writing under his belt, two novels and a bunch of awards. So it's definitely public school, but there's a few and far between. So I see what you're saying, and I'm not sure there's any particular area of the country that I see more innovation in. Probably but I do see a lot of innovation across the country in alternative schools. And so Chicago doesn't do alternative schools very well. I mean, they'll do magnets for that, or it's a different kind of structure here. But when you see an alternative school that's meant to address the unique needs of differently abled learners, then we look at individualization. The faculty and staff at an alternative school will look for students' differences as opposed to looking for their similarities. And I think we can learn a whole lot from alternative schools. It's not just about a student who, the traditional alternative school is for the kids who can't cut it, or whatever. I visited an alternative school in Montana where I was toured around by one of the most articulate students I have ever met in my life. And at the end, I said, "Why are you here?" The school was this awful collection of portables. And he said, "It's Montana. I'm Black." he was there just because he didn't fit in. So it was, there's a lot of different reasons why students find a right fit school. And I think the public school, the public schools, certainly in Chicago and probably in most other areas of this country, are their biggest flaw is that they look for student similarities as opposed to their differences.
Wow, that's really, really, really insightful, Amy. Thank you for that. And you know, at least in CPS, you have some choice over different kinds of schools. You know, and here I just feel like it was fine, but I guess I have this quest of the holy grail of schools. I'm always looking for like what's amazing and interesting in doing things differently, and in that there's no school that's perfect out there, but like I'm just really interested in schools that have they gather the impetus, at least with some people, to think about doing things differently for the benefit of kids. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, everyone. I'm going to stop recording in a second. But before I do you mind if you stop sharing for 2 seconds, Amy? And so I can go through my little spiel of what I wanted to share with everybody, if you want to kind of get more involved with us, and then we'll stick around and debrief, and everybody can ask some more questions if you want. So Actionable Innovations we're first and foremost a group that is trying to we're looking for like-minded people who want to do things differently and who want to explore education together. So think of us as a PLC for anybody who wants to get involved. You can come to our events. You can write for our publication on Medium. We have a group publication, or you can do a deeper dive and get into and actually help us form this group. And it's our motto right now is kind of do what you can when you can. I'm now out of a school working as a consultant, so I'm kind of doing a lot of the lifting along with Don Buckley. But we're hoping that we eventually will do some consulting work as a group, as a kind of a team effort down the road. Who knows if we'll get there, but that's kind of the intent. But right now we're hosting these conversations so that we can inspire our thinking. We're trying to articulate our thinking through writing, and hopefully it will lead to some interesting opportunities down the road. So this is where you can find us. If you go to Linktree/Actionable Inno, that's where all of our links are. If you want to get involved as a deeper dive, I can send you a document that will show you what we're about, and you can decide whether you want to move forward or not. And then our next conversation is going to be, we're doing 2 next week. One is going to be on the future of educational technology with Stephanie and Alex, who are in the chat. And I'm really excited about that because I think that's been a big shift during COVID. We're really kind of focusing on the pandemic. I don't think the pandemic is over by any means. And we're hoping that these 4 sessions that we're doing will help people kind of inspire them to keep on trying for change, even though everybody's under difficult circumstances. And then our last one, people may not understand what it is, but we would love to have your brains for this one. There's a ton of federal money that is coming to US schools through ESSER. School, and we'll go into it a little bit more on next Thursday, but we want to kind of help schools craft some ideas for using that money in creative and wise ways. And my big fear, as I say to everybody, is that we're going to spend it all on tutoring for learning loss or something like that, as opposed to using it in ways that could really benefit kids. And so that session is going to be about that. And even if you're not in a public school, I think it's of interest to people because theoretically schools are supposed to be kind of asking for community input about this funding, and wherever you live, there are public schools that could benefit from our wisdom. Whether they'll hear it or not is another story. But that's a topic that's coming up and is kind of a hot and heavy topic, I think, for schools or it's going to be. Schools are getting this money fairly soon, it sounds like, and if they haven't gotten it already, and it has to be used by 2025. So that's our last one. And please come as you can, do what you can. We'd love to have you. Amy, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. Thank you for leading this conversation. It's been really great. I'm going to stop recording, and then we can do some more informal things if people want to stick around, if I can figure out the technology.
Cool. Thanks.
Oh, we're back to our immersive environment.
Yeah, no, this is pretty funny because if I move my camera, I'm like,
I love it.
we've been having fun.